Morning, everyone. Welcome. I can see we've still got a few people joining. Welcome, Misha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To get us warmed up, let us know where you're joining from in the chat, if you can. I'm based in Sydney. I almost forgot where I'm from. Misha, where are you joining us from today?
Same thing. Sydney.
Nice.
Warm Sydney at the moment.
Warm Sydney. I know.
Yes.
I quite enjoyed the taste of spring that we got here
Oh yes,
yesterday. It
for sure.
was, albeit a bit scary.
For
Someone
sure.
from Canberra,
Awesome.
Auckland.
Wow.
Love that.
Wow.
Very cool.
Nice.
All right. Bowral, New Zealand. Oh, I've got a couple of Kiwis on. That's awesome.
Yes.
1 p.m. Hope you're having some lunch.
Yes.
Perth, Melbourne, of covering all bases today. Fantastic. All right. Well, I think we might just jump straight into it. We've got a lot of content to get through. Awesome. Let me just get my notes up. Okay, so thanks for joining us today. Sustainable finance, bridging the gap between profit and planet. Now, before we get into the fun stuff, I am going to run through a couple of the agenda and then some housekeeping. Pretty simple stuff. We'll be doing a short welcome and introduction. Then the bulk of this session is actually going to be Misha sharing his insights on sustainable finance. And then we'll have a live Q&A session at the end. Just some housekeeping. We've all been on these sessions before, but just a reminder that the chat function and the Q&A function will be open throughout. If you've got questions, please use the Q&A. It allows us to track them and then get back to you if anything wasn't answered in today's session. And we'll be running this for about 60 minutes. So we'll try and stay on time and let you all get to lunch on time. All right, fabulous. So my name is Shauna. I'm part of the Australian CFO community. I'm a community leader. And I'm also a marketing manager at Wheel. Wheel are the sponsors of today's session, so a huge thanks to them for getting behind and supporting this content. And I'm very excited to welcome Misha Veen. So Misha is the founder and MD at ESG Custodian. He's worked with over 50 companies to build sustainable solutions that reduce cost, increase resilience, and provide financial ROI. I will let you introduce yourself, Misha, because I'm sure you'll do a much better job. But please say hello and give us a bit of a background and what it is that you do.
Yeah, perfect. No, thanks, Shauna, and thanks for the opportunity. Great to speak in front of all you guys. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm a finance professional. I'm a qualified accountant. Moved very quickly into, so originally from Amsterdam, from Holland basically, moved quickly into shared services, BPO, and actually optimizing financial processes, record to report, purchase to pay, order to cash, all those ones basically. And at one point, the CFO said, basically, it's great that you get all these cost reductions. Can you look at our supply chain and operations? So I moved into operational excellence, financial supply chain, and looking at optimizing from a cost perspective, but also from an efficiency, productivity into the supply chain operations. And through that route, basically, I got into sustainability. And I guess basically where the benefit for me is basically, it's great to be sustainable as a business. It's great to actually put in sustainable practices. But unless there is a financial ROI attached to it, then yeah, it's a nice non-for-profit initiative, but there needs to be a financial benefit. So I guess basically there is always this link between, okay, it's great to be sustainable, but what is the financial ROI? So I guess basically that's the focus areas that we focus on.
Yeah, nice, love it.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Before we jump into the content, before I hand over to you, we're going to run a couple of polls just to get a bit of a temperature check on the audience here. So our first poll is really just to see how familiar everyone is with sustainability initiatives. Within your current organizations. I myself am not familiar at all, so I'm looking to learn a lot today. All right, fabulous. Thanks everyone for doing that. And then a second quick poll before we jump in. is just areas of interest, and yeah, I guess where you're looking to learn more. There's a whole scope as I've just started learning, and lots of different yeah, components to sustainability. So fantastic, awesome, good mix there across the board. Great. All right, enough of me waffling on. Misha,
Yeah.
I'm going to end this poll and hand across to you if you could get your slides ready.
Yeah.
And I will just remind everyone before we kick off, feel free to ask questions throughout. We want this to be interactive, and I'll do my best to politely interrupt Misha. And if we don't get to them, we've got some time dedicated at the end to answer all your questions. So thanks, Misha.
Now, if we can all see the screen. Brilliant.
Yes.
All right, let me just make sure that it starts moving. All right, so what are we covering today? As we said, basically, how can we make sure that the financials and sustainability initiatives are aligned, correct? Ultimately, basically, that's why we're trying to. So we're trying to make sure that we move from one to the other. So we, over the years, basically, have done a lot of, yeah, call it sustainable initiatives, projects, etc. And that actually led us to look at basically, okay, how can we solutionize all that data, correct? How can we solutionize all the information? How can we make sure that basically finance people, but also people across the organization can actually get data into the solution, so you don't capture all that data, you don't have to worry about capturing, reporting, and all those type of stuff. So that's what the focus area was. So why is it important for you as a finance professional to understand sustainability, correct? Why is it so relevant for you? First of all, and let's be absolutely clear, basically, risk and compliance. You can see basically that a lot of sustainability frameworks or initiatives are connecting with the IFRS framework. GRI and IFRS have recently, 24th of May, from the top of my head, basically, have signed a pact. Basically, there was already a collaboration, but they signed a pact basically to go forward as one, which means basically the disclosure management of a lot of the ESG disclosures, carbon footprint, modern slavery, starts to transition under the finance function more and more. And why is that? In the finance world, we're already used to audits. We already used to disclosures. We know reporting. We know how to provide reports to the government. So the first government that starts to move into that is, of course, Europe. Europe, basically, with their CSRD, basically starts to work in that space, that there is governance reporting. Just to give you an idea, basically 50,000 businesses will be impacted in Europe. In Australia, anywhere between 500 and 700 businesses will be impacted with the latest one. New Zealand, and I saw some New Zealand participants, 200 to 300 entities are impacted at the moment. So you can see it's picking up steam, basically. If you look at California, which is far ahead of the rest of the world in the US, more than 10,000 businesses are impacted by legislation, by compliance legislation. So you can see basically it becomes a real impact on the business. The next one is basically why cost efficiency, resource optimization. As a good example, basically, you can see basically energy efficient technologies. There's operational savings to be had, basically. We've seen basically in manufacturing organizations, basically anywhere between 15 and 30% of savings can be achieved basically by just having energy management systems to switch off lights, to change, to basically have automatic faucets, etc., etc. As a good example, basically, worked in the past for SAB Miller, which was a beer company, which had a target to reduce their operational water use per hectoliter of beer, basically. They met their target of 25% reduction in 2015, and they started in 2008, which saved them, and they actually overachieved it by 28%, which saved them 17 million US dollars just by reducing the water. So you can see basically the impact on your financials is quite substantial. So even doing water management, reuse, you can see the impact that it has on your financials. There's so much research, but there's also so much real data. Coca-Cola, as a good example, basically reduced their fuel cost by 20%. just by simply basically introducing a route optimization solution. Yeah, simple things like that. We have seen basically very clear that, and Gallup has supported that research as well. Basically, if you introduce OHS, modern slavery, if you focus on all these things, we've seen that organizations that focus on the employees basically are 21% more profitable. And this is research from very recent. Yeah. So there's so much information, but the focus is around long-term cost control. Ultimately, that's where you want to get to, correct? Better prices on your raw materials, incorporating recycled materials where possible, basically. And you can see basically anywhere between 5 and 20% you can actually save by doing it. And businesses have been doing it. Yeah, a lot of businesses have been doing it. The other one is access to capital. More and more investors find it important that ESG is embedded in your organization. We've seen it, and you get access to capital easily, or more easily. And I will give you a number of examples later on in the session. Competitive advantage and market differentiation. Boston Consulting Group did a research basically, and they said maybe 80% of customers or consumers are willing to change their buying behaviors. And that's quite a lot basically. And this is all supported by Nielsen, Accenture, McKinsey. There's so many studies, and we've seen it. We've seen basically people changing the buying habits. And I've got an example later on in the deck basically that shows basically how that impacted a company like Unilever, but also smaller SMEs basically, which are Australian based. Brand reputation, key. Now going for modern slavery, it's very much focused around brand reputation. How do you make sure that basically you know what's happening in your supply chain? How are the employees or even the contractors being supported? Do they work overtime? Do they work long hours? Are they being looked after, etc., etc.? And this is as close to home as you can possibly think about in the agricultural sector, but a lot of SMEs in Australia and in Europe and in US basically are also affected. And as a good example basically in this space, if you have employees basically, especially with the cost of living pressure basically, if an SME, and this is quite normal basically because they're trying to help the employees basically, if they give a loan that is more than or some kind of funding which is more than their salary can pay for a certain percent of their salary, then automatically basically that's a form of modern slavery because that employee can't just leave tomorrow. So even things like that is considered as a challenge. And of course, innovation and growth opportunities, correct? If you're looking at new initiatives from a sustainable and from a finance perspective, there is opportunities here. There's huge opportunities, growing markets. There's a lot of consumers that are really focused on that around that. And that's the key reason why we're here. Enhanced performance, correct? How can you actually make sure that you future-proof, but also increase your financial performance? Yeah. And give a number of examples of that. And the last one is your responsibility, correct? Finance has responsibility in the end, basically, to ensure long-term value creation from a financial perspective, operational perspective, business perspective, etc., etc. So there's definitely a responsibility component. And it shows basically 2004, a KPMG report highlighted that 6% of CFOs are actively integrating sustainability initiatives in their business. And they don't do that because it's just nice to do, correct? They're doing that because it also provides you financial performance. And some of it is because of compliance requirements. Yeah. So I just gave you a couple of things. Like I said, 24th of May, it started kicking in basically. Access to capital, access to improvement. 58% of consumers are willing to actually change their behaviors. Different research, this is very conservative, 58, because different research even up that number. So that just gives you an idea. So where do you start with all this, correct? How do you start identifying what type of opportunities there are? Yeah. Where do you start in that perspective? It's simple things. We got internal initiatives, can be energy efficient smart meters, can be automatic light sensors, can be motion detection, you can see it already in certain companies. You can see it even in restrooms. You put your hands under the faucet and it automatically starts running, correct? That's all about water prevention. You have automatic toilet flushing that reduces water. We have automatic power off on printers. A good example is basically, and that has been introduced in many businesses already, basically, you now need to walk to the printer and put your card on it before you can print. And that's all about basically, because in the old days, basically, there were piles of paper basically laying on printers. So things like that, smart plugs to reduce phantom power loads, basically. It's all about basically not only how can you reduce the energy, but also how can you save money, correct? That's ultimately what it is. You can see your energy bills go down. So how do you do it in your supply chain? We worked in warehouses where there was a lot of waste. Things were in the back of the warehouse wasn't used. The flow through wasn't correct, basically. So it was all about, okay, how do you improve the product flow? How do we increase inventory churn? Which means basically, I don't need a warehouse that is 60 square meter. I'm okay with a 30 square meter. So you can see basically a lot of improvement in your operational processes, and that can be in an FMCG, in a beverage, in the insurance business, in oil and gas, wherever it is. And we focus specifically on making sure that whatever we come up with basically is industry specific. But it can be recycled materials on one hand. It can be enhanced energy efficiency on the other hand, basically. It can be a paperless office. There's so many things basically that we have identified, and we start small. You can start some of these things tomorrow. It's not, you don't have to create windmills or solar systems, and it's all great and that's brilliant to do. But even within your office or within your warehouse or within your operations, there are so many things you can start doing tomorrow. So it's identifying internal ones. Now then we have the external ones. And they talk about green bonds, sustainable infrastructure projects you can invest in, impact investment. Now, when we talk about impact investment, what we've seen basically, it needs to be close to your business. There's no point as a retail company to start looking at health services. It's just too far away, basically. So what we've seen where impact investing is most beneficial is if, as an example, you're a utility company and you're looking to move into solar or wind. If you're a food and beverage company looking at regenerative agriculture. If you're a real estate company, basically, how can you introduce affordable housing development? Keep those impact investments close to your business model or close to your business. We've seen that that's where the benefits are. And it also aligns them with your overall business strategy, correct? For logistics companies, look at your fleet. Look at your CO2 emissions. If you're a clothing brand, it's all about basically how can you recycle. You can see that in companies like Patagonia, but H&M does the same thing. How can you recycle? If you go to H&M in Australia, basically, you bring a bag of clothing, basically, you get a discount on your next purchase. It's simple things like that. It's all about looking what is close to your business. Beverage companies, as I gave you an example earlier, basically very water conscious. How can we reduce water usage? How can we recycle water? How can we minimize ingredients, etc., etc.? And that's probably the areas around it. Then the next bit, and this is like a normal project. This is not different from identifying from a finance perspective your normal project, correct? What are the criteria? What are the criteria basically to select it? Start with strategic fits, business goals, where do you start, correct? It needs to align to your business goals. That's how it needs to be scalable, replicable. Whatever you do, basically, don't do it once, do it twice, 3 times, 4 times. How can you replicate it? Of course, there's a regulatory compliance. That's almost like a you can't avoid it. It's the same thing with any other project. If you need to change the system because there is a tax change or there's a GST code change, you need to change it, correct? There's not, I can't do the project. I just need to do it, basically. So there's a regulatory change, then important. Stakeholder impact. We haven't touched it so much, but what is the impact to your employees? Important, because your employees are your business. So what's the impact to your employees, suppliers, customers, investors? Start with the employees and then the rest basically filters through. How can you actually get your employees to think about basically? So how does it impact you? measurability and transparency. What gets measured gets done, basically. That is very much in the finance space. If you start looking at PO compliance and you start measuring PO compliance, then you start acting on PO compliance. If you look at how many journals you need to do in your finance environment and you start measuring how many journals you do during month end, you start changing the number of journals and you look at first time right principle. So it's the same thing here. That's why it's so logical to link it with finance, because a lot of the principles, a lot of the things that you do already, or you're thinking of doing already to reduce your month-end close timeline, or to look at compliance in your end-to-end finance processes, it's the same thing in sustainability. So what is the operational impact? What is it doing to your operations? Yeah, is a productivity improvement, etc. And then you get, of course, in the end, financial ROI. Now, what's the ROI on any of these initiatives? What is your ROI? Does it need to be, do you have a return on investment within 3 months or 6 months or 9 months? What is, from a business perspective, what's an acceptable NPV? So it's all those kind of things. So that's an important component. If we then go forward, basically, what are some of the successful projects that we have done? And again, they were not crazy. Modern slavery, basically, we introduced a supply code of conduct, which was just an extension of our employee code of conduct of the business. So that showed basically that how we feel about making our employees feel and how it works. Basically, we just extended it to our suppliers. So we just introduced supply code of conduct, and that already made a lot of change into the supplier's behavior. And then, of course, we measured it. We reviewed it. We put it as part of our supplier performance. So now, instead of only look at delivery timelines and cost and contract compliance, we also looked at, okay, give us your supply code of conduct, give us some metrics. We reduced massive, basically, productivity levels, even at our suppliers, but even in ourselves, basically, within our operation, basically, because we were focusing on it. So, and ultimately, basically, it reduced the lower insurance cost, which is at the moment basically growing and growing kind of things. We did a number of CO2 assessments, and that even led basically within the PPE business, basically, that they looked at, because they created their whole bill of material, they knew the cost for the bill of material. They basically said, okay, we are buying this from company X in China, but hey, if we can actually manufacture or assemble it ourselves far more easier, because all these raw materials came from Europe anyway. This was a European business, so why would we move everything to China and then go back, basically? So they took it close to home. They even reused it, basically. This was a fire extinguisher business, basically. So they started collecting fire extinguishers, repainting it, checking it, putting foam back in it, and start over again. It made a huge impact to their financials and their business model. And it was a simple thing to do. And then supply chain resilience. Work with one of Australia's leading livestock export industry bodies, basically. They look to harmonize all their paperwork. They had more than 130 forms. And what we did is basically we just put it into a simple database, and we had one form, and it automatically populated all those forms. Now the administrative burden of the exports basically just disappeared overnight by just doing something simple. So often these initiatives don't require systems or massive changes or whatever it is. It can be small in their perspective. So that's, I think, a key element to actually highlight it. I can list you another 20, but these were just a number of them that we thought of. So again, how do we measure? How do we measure the impact, basically? As we said, what gets measured gets done. Yeah, if you start looking at the numbers, then ultimately it starts getting done. Now, there's many different metrics, and you are already familiar with KPIs and some of these metrics. But this is all about basically how do you connect the two. So triple bottom line is a framework basically that measures the impact on people, planet, and profit, ultimately, basically. So it looks at basically how does it impact the different things, basically. It's an important green profit margin. How much of your profit comes from green initiatives? So if you change products, if you have a green product line, or you focus on reusable materials, now that is a green product, basically. How much of your profit comes from that? And that is something that Unilever has a good example of, basically. They looked at basically, okay, what was my profit margin from my normal business versus the elements that were green focused? And looking very simple, basically, is it actually making money or not, ultimately? resource efficiency ratio. How much of my resources can be reused? How much of my resources can be enhanced, etc., etc. So there's some of these metrics basically. How much natural resources is consumed, and how much financial value is generated from that basically. So if I put all these natural resources in there, what is actually the profit that I'm getting, or etc., etc. So there's a huge list of these items, and it's pick and choose. After the session, I will share. We share some documents basically which has this full list, and you can actually look at it and say, okay, this actually makes sense for us because we have already got all these metrics. It's just adding this additional bit to it, and that's often the case. A lot of times you already have a lot of this data, so it's not, don't start from scratch. It's extending it. When we look at introducing sustainability in your business, it's not creating new processes. It's basically extending existing processes to incorporate a sustainability component. As I said, for a supplier, you already do your supplier performance, you just add a sustainability component to your supplier components. So that's ultimately what it is, basically. So this is just giving you an idea. Yeah. Tips and tricks. That's always an important one, correct? What are some of these tips and tricks that I need to do? It needs to align to your financial goals. Whatever your sustainability initiative is, it needs to have a financial goal or an operational business goal. Yeah, because we are talking about to finance here, let's make sure that the sustainability initiative is linked to your financial goals. High impact areas. What are some of the high impact areas that you can look at? Quick wins. Start with quick wins. Yeah, start with low-hanging fruits. Don't start to build solar from day one. Start with quick wins. What can you do in the office already? What can you do? Use data. Every business has a lot of data. It's transforming that data into information that allows you to take action. Same thing with finance. It's about collecting that data and then say, okay, what can I do to that data to create scenarios or create potential planning, or look at the data basically. It's the same thing with your budget forecasting. How do you do that? You create scenarios. So it's the same thing with this. It's creating scenarios. Involve key stakeholders. Involve other teams. Create cross-functional teams. Say, okay, this should be done by finance, but hey, let's bring in a warehouse person, or let's bring in a marketing person. How can we create cross-functional teams? What you see that businesses basically that have a very cross-functional and people from a different background. Let's be honest, I'm from Europe, work with people from different cultures, different ways. Everybody has different viewpoints. And you will see basically that innovation and forward-looking basically is often when there's different viewpoints. Now, finance has definitely a big role to play in that perspective. Regulatory changes. Keep abreast of what is happening in the world. If you're exporting or you're working with Europe, be aware of CSRD and what's happening there. If you're working with the US, know what's going on. Be aware. It's planned well in advance. And when you plan for things, then at least basically you're aware of it and you can start looking at, okay, what initiatives is important for me at the moment? Is it that I want to move to Singapore, where they are focusing on massive at the moment around sustainability? Or can I stay in Australia, where there's more and more focus, but at least I'm comfortable with that space? The next one is, and it sounds really bad, technology. Use technology where possible and use it logical. Don't start buying technologies which is massive, correct? Make it fit for purpose. Make it scalable. Don't there's no point of and I always say that within the finance space, basically, there's no benefit of implementing an SAP ERP system within a small and medium business. It's just too big. There's too much data that you need to enter. Use fit for purpose solutions and make sure that these solutions add value to what you're trying to achieve, correct? It's the same thing, basically. What can it do to remove some of these bottlenecks that you have, right? Adapt. Important. Things change continuously. It's just fact of life, basically. Things change, so adapt. use agile methodologies where you can adapt, where you can change. It's still a methodology that is very firm, and it's not just a free-for-all, but it's a methodology that adapts. It has very clear, specific timelines. So within the next 6 weeks, that is being delivered. In the next 6 weeks after, but at least maybe after the 6 weeks, you can review if that is still required, yes or no. So review and adapt. And funny enough, when you look at sustainability, the easiest place where to start is in your procurement function. The procurement function is perfect, basically, to start with sustainability. If you really want to make an impact, it's working with your suppliers. See basically how they can reduce costs. See how they can actually be more sustainable with their products. We work with a business in Europe, basically. They just changed their packaging. And not because they want to be more sustainable. No, they had 20 different package sizes for the same product because every country wants to have their different package size. So we just harmonize our packing size, which reduce manufacturing, packing cost, different pallet sizes, container issues, but also we were able to bring in sustainable packaging at the same time. But it saved immense amount of cost, if that makes sense. So that's just some of the things, basically. Financial performance and environmental returns. I highlighted Unilever already, basically, and I've just highlighted here some figures, basically. They clearly state basically that sustainable brands basically were their growth in their growth market. Yeah, they basically, the CEO has been very, very clear on, and I can give many articles that moving into the sustainable practice space has actually given them financial returns, massive amount of financial returns. And that is, of course, for a big company where, of course, a small thing can have massive financial impact. But even for smaller companies, we've seen it. I basically give a good example in Australia. Who gives a crap? Correct? Brilliant example. Basically, they use basically, like I said, basically, they change their toilet paper. As I said, 100% recycled or bamboo, but they've grown massively. They've grown in 1 year 250%. But again, basically 50% of their profits goes to improving and build toilets and sanitation. So it's close to their business model, right? They don't start now going to agricultural space, or they go to a completely, they are keeping whatever they do from an impact analysis is close to what they're trying to achieve. But that's a good one. IKEA, deforestation, big name, basically. They're focused on making sure that forests are being rebuilt. They look at CO2. They have a commitment. It's very clear, but it's also measurable. It's not just a finger in the air. Okay, we are going to do this and this and this. So these are some of the impacts, and I've got many more, basically, which I'm happy to share after our session. Then the last bit, basically, continuous improvement. Very similar to finance. Continuous improvement. How do you continuously improve? What do you do? Where do you start? Where do you end? Let's start with clear and measurable goals, smart goals. Yeah, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's the same thing in any project, basically. Let's make sure that they are achievable. Let's make sure that they do what they do. Continuous feedback loop. Make sure that basically you get continuous feedback. If something doesn't work, why didn't it work? So we're not making the same mistake over and over again. Continuous learning. Make sure that sustainability is part of the finance culture, and employees basically can speak up and identify issues. Most of the ideas basically that we got were mostly from the people on the ground. When we walked in warehouses and we looked at sustainability, it was the guys on the ground basically that said, yeah, it's because we have to walk from here to here to here, and then ultimately it goes to the logistics provider, but we have gone through the full warehouse 4 times. So the efficiency was crazy. So we just changed the product flow, and therefore we could reduce the warehouse space. So there are simple things like that, basically. Compliance, and I think I highlight that. Make sure that basically you keep abreast of compliance. Same thing with finance, IFRS changes, or any other changes in finance. Keep abreast of basically what is coming. And it's very natural to finance. And especially finance people, basically, when you do reporting, you already know what's coming next year. So this is exactly the same thing. And this is always a careful thing, because people throw AI and advanced analytics as buzzwords. Use it where it makes sense. Yeah. And I will give you a very simple example, basically. We have a solution, and that solution creates business cases based on assumptions and based on information. AI is perfect for that because every business case is based on assumptions and based on best guess. So it's not the finished product, but it gives you a really good starting point. Disclosures. You have all the data. You can use machine learning to create the disclosure report. It's just a draft report, but it's great to actually kick it off. So actually, it's not a finished product, but it's great to actually provide to use machine learning, AI type things, or anything around data analytics to create a draft of something. A draft report, a draft audit report, whatever it is, basically. But it's a good start, basically. It's all about transparency. Make sure it's transparent. And then when you have the transparency, it's about reporting to your stakeholders, reporting to internal stakeholders, etc. And then coming back to cross-functional teams. Yeah, how do you make sure that basically you get cross-functional teams, because they often basically bring new ideas and new views, kind of things in the world.
Misha, I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Is that all right if I jump in?
Of course, yeah.
One was just relating to a couple of slides back, and so I was a bit slow on the on this one. But the slide with Unilever, I've got a question from Nina. Does growth come from cost saving, or is it more the brand loyalty, higher acquisition from customers looking to purchase from brands that invest into sustainability?
It's a very interesting question, basically. The research and everything else says basically consumers drive the sustainability roadmap. So yeah, research said basically it's consumers switch to brands that are more sustainable because they feel more connected with it. Yeah. And you can see that. But saying that basically people are very cost conscious at the moment, especially nowadays, right? With everything. So it's also very clear that it's shown basically that if the price stays within a certain bracket, then people are willing to change. But if it goes outside that bracket, if it becomes a real premium, then people stick with the non-sustainable brands, if that makes sense. So it's finding the balance. A lot of times it's finding the balance between, okay, what are people willing to spend? Yeah, in that perspective. So in fashion, there's a very, very clear focus at the moment. And that's purely because Patagonia leads the way. It's very public. People, they've been talking about it. And you see that, I think there's even a jeans business in Sydney, basically here, that basically says, you know what, if you buy a jeans, it will be repaired for free for the rest of your life, correct? People start to link with that because they see not only the financial benefit, but they actually believe that is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Does it help?
Yeah, nice. Thank you. And then one more, sorry, from Susan. So coming back to the info on metrics, how do you prioritize which metrics to focus on for our business if this is our first time considering sustainability?
Start with things like ROI. ROI is already a metric that you know, correct? So now you basically look at what the ROI is of sustainability initiatives and see if that actually matches your other ROIs. So don't start doing something completely different or completely new. Use what you're already doing now and just extend the metric. If you look at all the metrics, and I'm happy to share, I'm sharing it through at the later stage, basically, and you will get it. You will see a lot of these metrics are just the finance metrics, just extended. It's not a completely new metric. If you look at the description, you're like, oh, we already have that metric. Oh yeah, I need to just basically now focus on the green bit. I now need to see the profit and split it by green, which is just splitting your sales between your normal product line and your green product line as a good example. And therefore you know it already. So it's just grouping it differently. But start small. Yeah, start with what you already have. And we'll give you some examples of that. But otherwise, happy to have a chat at any point in time to just give some specific guidance in that perspective. Not a problem.
Awesome. Thanks, Misha. I'll let you continue.
Yeah, no worries. All good. Please ask. That's the focus kind of things. So last bit basically is basically engage your stakeholders. It's very simple. You can't do this alone. Finance can't do this alone. Yeah, you need to have your stakeholders. So it's all about articulating what are the benefits to them. Yeah, people are more likely to change if they know what's in it for them. In the end, basically, it's the same thing with investors, customers, suppliers, employees. What is it for me? And it sounds really horrible, but unfortunately, that's just basically how people are. And it makes perfect sense. So what is in it for them? Demonstrate very clearly how that initiative, that financial initiative and sustainable initiative actually impacts them. What is the benefit to them, basically? What can they do with it? It reduces the risk profile. It increases, it supports cost savings also for the supplier, etc. Align with priorities, employee priorities, investor priorities, understand the goals. When employees join, why are they joining? what is it that they join? What do they want to get out of it? Do they want to have a career improvement? Do they want to be, what do they want to get out of it? Right? And that's the same thing with this. What do they want to get out of it? So again, it's just extending the sustainability bit on what people already do. Use, and this is always an important one, use effective communication channels. Yeah. So if you already have communication channels established with the investors, use the same communication channel to also communicate what you're doing in this space. Don't start creating additional meetings. Same thing with employees. If you already set up weekly sessions with the employees, don't just put it in there. Don't make it a 6-hour meeting or increase it. Just build it in there, but just make it pragmatic, right? That's key kind of things. So that's what it is. Collaboration. We are very strong about that. Collaboration means basically input is given from multiple sides, right? It's not only finance telling, it's finance understanding what is important and combine that through a collaborative approach. What is in it for both parties and how can we actually move forward? So it's working with different departments, external parties, and it can be anybody. It doesn't need to be a consultant. It can be a partner that actually is doing something in sustainability and basically is a software solution that already do it. Or it can be a partner that actually is the cleaning company that partners with you. It can be anybody. Yeah. So don't just limit yourself to cross-functional departments or going to consultants, etc. Use partners. Yeah, resources, knowledge. And the last one is foster a green mindset in your finance team. Yeah. Make it almost part of it. It's the same thing when organizations, and definitely that's big in manufacturing, is creating a safety culture within their business, correct? It's creating, people then become aware that, hey, that plug is not plugged in right. Hey, that loose cable is laying there and people can trip over it. It's creating that culture, that green culture, basically in your finance department. And safety is a good example, especially in those, in the oil and gas business, in pharmaceutical. Safety is important, correct? It's an important component of what you're doing. Therefore, use the same methodologies to introduce a green culture, basically. So create training and awareness, celebrate success. Yeah. Doesn't need to be a big thing. Can be small. Align the incentives in their PDP, the personal development plans. Yeah. Introduce basically these initiatives in your personal development. Promote support, promote leadership, promote support, basically. Endorsement can be small things, basically. And encourage it. Encourage it different ways. It's a weird thing, basically, but the employee of the month thing, basically, it feels very American, but it is something that clearly works in organizations. You can see it a lot on the floor in supply chain organizations or warehouse. You got an employee of the month, etc., etc. So there's a lot of that type of stuff, kind of things. So it is about basically engagement, and you can't do this alone, correct? That's important to know. So what is finance role in the end, if I can say that? Be pragmatic, start small, look at ROIs, look at basically what is the impact of what I'm doing, and there's plenty of examples that even small steps are reported on. So when you look at CSRD reporting, it's not so much, okay, what are you doing now? No, what are your initiatives? What are you doing? And it can be a big thing, it can be a small thing. It doesn't matter. From a government perspective, it's all about what are you doing. So from a compliance perspective, it's all about that. It's the same thing as your, if I can leave it like that, your financial audit report, correct? An audit report is okay, it shows what is deficient, and then it's all about what are you doing to mitigate, eliminate those potential risks. So that hopefully basically gave a little bit of an insight. I know I ran through this, an insight of basically what this is about, how you can start small, and hopefully it was useful.
That was great, Misha. And yes, please drop your questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll get to those. We've got a few minutes left to run through any more information that you might want or need. I had a question, Misha. I just love hearing the juicy details of things. So was there any other examples that you had of companies that have maybe changed a very niche element, or there's like any cool stories from your from your travels?
They did something very niche. I will give a really it's an interesting one basically. So we were asked basically by the National Department of Health in Papua New Guinea to look at their medical supply chain. Yeah, not only from a sustainability but also from a cost effectiveness. Now, there were many consultants that were in there before basically, and they came up with, oh yeah, we need to do technology, we need to implement this, we need to implement that. Now, Papua New Guinea doesn't even have mobile reception in most places, so technology is just not happening, correct? So it was very simple basically, starting with the basics. So we basically looked at, okay, how do the medical products, devices, how do they come in? And they came in containers, and the containers were filled up, and there were manual labor to move it all into their warehouse, and it was crazy. There were no pallets, no nothing. So we very clearly basically just put in a supplier letter and say, this is how we want to get it. Now that immediately, and we spoke to the suppliers, and we're like, yeah, we were surprised that nobody had actually asked us. So the thing is basically, going back to Shauna, a lot of people just don't ask. And if you don't ask, you don't get. So what we found basically is by just asking it and just requesting some of this stuff basically, instead of taking 5 days to unload a container, it took them, I'm not joking, 5 hours to unload the container.
Wow.
And that reduced pressure. People were happier, etc., because they could do other things, right? And they could actually help the community with getting the medical devices and antibiotics basically to, I think there are 2,200 plus medical centers, aid centers, etc. And it went out there instead of laying in a warehouse and basically went to waste. So that was very specific around the National Department of Health, and that was in a country where, now let's be honest, roads and everything is a challenge by itself. So that's one. And another thing, there's so many different examples.
It's almost like because something's always been done that way. It's that trap you fall into of I've always done it like this. So until you start thinking through the reasons why, it's really interesting, the psychology behind it.
Simplification. Often basically people make things overly complex. It's just crazy basically how many times we have seen basically overly complex operations of supply chains because somebody believed that was the right thing to do because it was a compliance component, and we looked at the compliance component and the compliance component wasn't even there, or it was completely misinterpreted in that perspective. Especially in heavily regulated industries like the pharmaceutical space, medical space, oil and gas, banking sector, where people stick to that compliance component, correct? But nobody is then diving into that and say, okay, is it really relevant? We did a lot of work in the livestock industry, where they wanted to end-to-end traceability of beef, correct? And basically they did it all the way basically from knowing which cow, which paddock, which etc., all the way to the consumer. And then we asked the consumer, do you really care where that cow comes from or that bit of beef? And they were like, oh, we just want to know the region. where it comes from. We don't really care about the specific paddock, and no, we just
Yeah.
want to know if it's coming from Toowoomba or if it comes from Western Australia. We just want to know where it's coming from. And that so there was so much complexity in getting it all the way down. And then we found that by just doing a generic, it was faster, easier, more cost effective, and actually more sustainable because we could focus on basically green pastures and regenerative agriculture and all stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, that type of stuff.
Awesome. So our questions are flooding in now. So one from Susan: is there an average time frame that it usually takes for a finance department in a small to medium-sized company, so let's say less than 500 employees, to start supporting the sustainability movement, to having sustainability completely embedded into all finance workflows and reporting?
Wow. How long is a piece of string, kind of thing? Yeah. It's I don't believe in, and might be a very clear statement, and that comes from the finance background, basically. I don't believe in best practice. I believe in good practice. To get to best practice, the costs are quite substantial to get to that level, and then you need to stay on that level, and it's quite costly. So the reason why I say how long is a piece of string, it doesn't need to be sitting in every single workflow. Certain workflows in finance, they don't need sustainable processes, correct? It's fine, correct? Some of it can be very quickly done, correct? If you're still sending out your purchase orders on paper, then digitizing that's pretty straightforward. Most systems do that. It's maybe a bit of a weird comment to make, but I remember that I was in businesses that basically still did a lot of that stuff, or sent emails, or did manual emails and all that stuff, attaching the PDF, etc. There's better solutions. So it's all about basically the initiatives need to be financially also making sense. So if you look at the full scale, and easily give you a number of areas to look at, it's all about basically, okay, as long as you're on a journey, it's not so much the end goal, it's more what are you doing, because things change continuously. If you think about probably 5 years ago, to do certain things and to be paperless, as a good example, was far more expensive than it is now. Yeah. So I hope it answers your question a bit, but don't think about, okay, there's an end. Think about, okay, what can I do now and how can I build it up?
Nice. We've got one more. I've got a couple more questions. We'll try and get to both of them. Are there any hot tips for getting these conversations started internally and getting buy-in? Raising something not business as usual in our workplace on top of getting this started from within the finance team is not always received well.
Yeah. Heard it a lot. It's the same thing when I did financial process improvement. People said that's great, but I don't have the resources to do that. My finance team is completely under the pump. I don't have time or effort basically to do that. And this is why I'm saying basically, start small. How do you create internal alignment and that's what I highlight. What is in it for them, correct? What is in it for the finance person to do that? I'll give you an example. We looked at, so we had a team basically that was basically doing vendor reconciliations, every month vendor reconciliations. And then they did that basically, and therefore their time was spent on vendor reconciliations. We introduced something very simple, robotic process automation, and basically that took care of it. Now that team was freed up, correct? So sometimes it's also doing non-sustainable processes to free up your finance team to then be able to do it. So unfortunately, sometimes you need to go through a bit of a step to just streamline some of the other processes. And give you another example, basically, worked in a shared service center or run a shared service center. And we send out reports to our stakeholders. Every month, basically, we send out reports. And there were 3 people working on doing these month-end reports. And then one month, basically, unfortunately, that report or the solution, SAP in this case, stopped sending the reports because it was an issue. And we only found out 5 days after month end that it wasn't sent. But funny enough, nobody actually responded. And nobody actually questioned the report. So the next month we switched it off. We thought, let's just see if these people need it. And after 3 months, basically, we contacted all the stakeholders, said, oh yeah, by the way, we normally send out these reports, but nobody responded. Are you using it? And we found out that half of these reports were never used. Yeah, there was one country, Italy, that used one report that came back after a month and said, hey, we haven't received a report. So it's sometimes also basically, and then this was very extreme, of course, because the system didn't work, but it's sometimes also questioning, adapting, and understanding basically, is that report, is that information really relevant for my stakeholders? Or do they like to have something on top of it? As I said, if you look at some of the metrics or stuff, they're not really that extensive. They're just an extension of what you're doing now. So it's basically looking at what are you doing now and what are some of the quick wins that you can start off. That's it.
Yeah. Love it. And then we've got one more question, I think, before we wrap, from Fawn. I handle a virtual assistance company.
Yeah.
What are the possible areas that I can improve and lead to sustainable growth? And then there's a second part. In your opinion, is this industry still competitive in the market? So, virtual assistance company.
Wow, yeah, it's a difficult one. And the reason why I'm saying it, especially with AI and robotics, basically, a lot of these processes can be automated. I remember basically when I was in shared services in with multinationals, basically, the first focus that we had basically is automating those processes and seeing how we can actually introduce where possible sustainable practices as part of the automation. In the virtual assistant space, basically, it's all about basically what can you add that will benefit your customer. So if you, as a virtual assistant, and surprisingly, basically, they have a lot of, you get a lot of information, you get a lot of insights in basically what are some of the pain points within the organization. It is easy then to actually suggest small initiatives that you can pick up as a virtual assistant, if that makes sense, basically, to support the organization in their goals. And it doesn't matter where that person sits. Shared service centers were sitting across Europe and across the world, basically, and we created added value services to our finance teams on the ground. And we didn't have like full finance teams. It was just basically a CFO and maybe a financial controller that was locally, of course, making sure that the legislation of the local requirements were met. But we basically provided them at one point value add scenario analysis and another reports basically that allowed the CFO to be having conversations with his CEO locally or their MD locally. So as a virtual assistant basically is you probably need to identify basically based on all the information you get. So that's the feedback loop. What is the information you get from your client that you can then translate into, okay, we can also provide you this. A lot of organizations are struggling with, and that's key, with getting stuff done. Yeah. I hope it
Great.
Yeah.
So we've got a minute left, Misha. Sorry to cut you off.
That's fine.
So I might just want a quick poll, just to capture anyone that might want to hear more from Misha or from Wheel. Feel free to answer that poll and we can send you some details. Misha, I think you had a slide too with some of your information. If you want to, you're more than welcome to pop that up on screen. But just so everyone knows, we'll be sharing all of these details after the session with the recording. And if you have any questions, please come back and let us know, and we'll put you in touch.
Anytime.
I'll look at that. 1 minute to go. Very good.
Very well planned.
Well done. Okay, great. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the session. I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon. Go and grab some lunch if you haven't already. Thank you so much, Misha, for giving us your time and expertise. I've definitely learned a lot. Yeah, and watch out for the recording and the email that will go out tomorrow for everyone. Is it too soon to say enjoy the weekend? Cheers.
Bit too soon,
All right.
but thank you all. Thank you all for your attention, and thanks all. Yeah.
Thanks, Misha. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mia.
Bye.